Before we get started with Scott Pearson's program this evening, which I know we're all looking forward to, I have just a few more announcements to make. We've got a couple of upcoming field trips at Deception Pass State Park on March 21st. The trip is leaving from the West Beach, and that's at 10 a.m., and Diane Sheldon is the leader for that. And everyone is welcome, of course. And then on Rosario Head on April 4, also at 10 a.m., Madrone is leading that field trip, and registration is not required for either of these. You can just show up whenever you'd like. And Madrone, would you like to mention a few more field trips you've got planned?
Yeah, so on March 19th at South Whidbey State Park, I still have a couple spots for the hike through the forest. So I'll be hiking up through the forested wetland and going up some of the steeper trails up on the upper part of the park. So that is, go to the website to register for that. And then on April 11th, I'm going to be having a small sit at Freeland County Park. That's that main park at the boat launch at Freeland. And that'll be an accessible field trip. We'll be near the parking area and also near the playground. So if you have family who want to come and bring kids, there'll be somewhere for the kids to play while people bird. And we'll have a spotting scope for people to use, as well as binoculars and field guides. And that's from noon to 2 p.m. And we'll be looking for ducks before they depart, and all the sort of usuals there, bald eagle, crow, the sparrows. And then I wanted to mention sort of a save the date in late May, the weekend after Memorial Day, is the 61st annual Weenus Campout. It's a really fun event where you go over and a lot of people from Audubon and people from other groups like Native Plant Society go over to Weenus, and you can spend a day or 3 or 4 days camped out at the campground. There's lots of field trips. Their focus is broader than just birds. It's birds, bugs, and blooms. There's tons of wildflowers in bloom, and the bird variety there is very different from the Puget Sound, so a lot of stuff that's very common there you would never see here. So you can go and you can just spend the whole time in the campground, and a lot of people get tons of lifers. And it's a very relaxed thing, and there's lots of field trips every day. There's campfire talks in the evening. There is owling, and you can even hear owls from the campground, often more than one species. So if you're interested in owling, it's great for that. And if you're interested in carpooling or letting someone else carpool with you, please contact me. I'm going to be trying to arrange that for folks who want to try carpool. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you very much. And if you didn't catch all of the dates and times and details, you can find those on our website. So just look for whidbeyaudubon.org, and all that information's on our calendar. Okay, I have to do a little business here, and I want to just remind everybody that we always have some board vacancies, and so we continue to have board and committee vacancies. If there's something you might be interested in, we probably have a slot that we can fill you in on if you're interested in helping with membership management, our education program, our events programs, that sort of thing. But right now, probably most urgent is that in May we have an upcoming election for both the position of both president and vice president. These are 2-year terms. And a call for nominations for the 2 positions was made at last month's meeting, and it was also announced in our March newsletter as well. Pursuant to our bylaws, nominations can be made tonight at this membership meeting, and at the end of the meeting, the nominations are supposed to close. However, to date, we have received no nominations for either position. I just want to assure you that you may nominate yourself, but I do have to let you know that you cannot nominate somebody else who does not wish to serve. So darn it. And
if anybody wants to just stand up right now and nominate themselves, that would be delightful. If you would rather not do that, but you would like to talk to me after the meeting, I would be happy to chat with you about that. And we'll just kind of see where things go from here. And just to reiterate that if you might be interested in serving on the board or as a committee member, you can go to, again, our website under the volunteer page and get more information. And I'm happy to talk to you about that. And our executive director, Joaquin, would be delighted to talk to you about that as well. So let me see what else I have here. I think Patty is, oh, Govinda, you've got a little update you want to give us all, please.
Just looked up Christmas bird count results, and we picked up 31 ravens last year, and 6 of them were in the Langley area, so there's definitely a lot of ravens. So I just want to do an update on the Grateful Birds book that Matt and I wrote. And what we've done was we paired 40 Washington State birds with 40 Grateful Dead tunes. And if I hadn't mentioned it before, Francis Wood wrote one of the forewords. So half of the book proceeds go to Whidbey Audubon and the other half go to Little Big Fest. And so I just want to give you an update for last year's sales, and that is we donated $782.50 to Whidbey Audubon, plus another $162 is coming from online sales. So calculator tells me that's $944.50 for the birds. So which is awesome. Thank you. So if you haven't had a chance already to buy one, Moonraker in Langley carries them. Chops in Langley, the barbershop, also carries them. It's online at bookshop.org. I've got a couple with me that I can sell at the end of the meeting. And also, if you don't want another book in your house, I totally get it. We have 2 copies available through the Snow Isle library system, and you can check them out. But we did write this book as a fundraiser, so if you do check out a library book, I would kindly suggest you make a donation to Whidbey Audubon. So thank you, and that's all I have.
Okay, well, thank you, Govinda. We truly appreciate your talent and your generosity that you've shared with us. Thank you. And now Patty's going to give us a little information about our Wings Over Whidbey Festival for 2026.
It's coming, so you need to mark your calendars for September 25th for the dinner we're featuring Paul Bannock is coming to speak to us about a year in the life of Northwestern woodpeckers. Anyway, he will be speaking to us, and we are looking forward to that. We are also it's going to be at the Nordic Hall on September 25th, and his talk, as I said, will be a year in the life of Northwest woodpeckers. And we will accompany this by a meal that is catered by Orlando's Southern Barbecue. And tickets will go on sale very soon for this, and you can get it in our newsletter or on site again. On September 26th, we will have the Wings Over Whidbey, the free events and everything on that day. So mark your calendars, September 25th and September 26th. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. And Wings Over Whidbey this year is going to be at Camp Casey. And so we're looking forward to having it at that venue. I think that'll be a really good spot for it. So very briefly, I just want to remind us all that Whidbey Audubon has been an important part of the community for over 40 years. All of the work that we've done depends on our volunteers and financial support from the community. If you're not a member and are interested in joining, you can do that this evening at the welcome table, or you can sign up via our website. If you are able to support us with a financial donation or by volunteering in some capacity, you can go to the website and just take care of either of those, and or reach out through the Contact Us link, and Joaquin or I will be happy to get back with you. So I do really appreciate all of your attention this evening, and I'm going to turn this over now to Board Member Linda Rhodes, who's going to introduce this evening's speaker.
Hello. Okay. If you read the cover article on your latest issue of Audubon, you have done your homework for tonight. You got your introduction to our speaker and to the topic that he's going to talk about. Scott Pearson is going to talk to us about tufted puffins, and I want to tell you a little bit about Scott. He is a dedicated state employee working on natural resources. He's been with the state now for 26 years, practically, 22 with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I used to work in fisheries, and I kept hearing this name, Scott Pearson, but it was about marine mammals, or it was about forage fish, or it was about seabirds. And it turns out I thought, this has got to be more than one guy. And it isn't. He does all of this work. It takes a lot to be a scientist for a government, because you're not only asked to produce data and write peer-reviewed publications, of which he's got over 70, but you also have to write policy papers and provide information to people who make legislation or management decisions. And so your science is really on point most of the time, and Scott's done a wonderful job for our state and for the Pacific Northwest. Scott came from the Midwest, at University of Michigan, I think, for his bachelor's in science and master's in science, but he got his Ph.D. at UW, and he's been here in the Northwest ever since, and we're all the richer for it. So I felt like what his objectives in his work were best said with, he assesses population trends and identifies mechanisms responsible for the decline of species of conservation concern. And that becomes increasingly relevant today as we see the pressures on the ecosystem and habitats and non-human organisms. And so I'm grateful for Scott and the work that he does. Dr. Scott Pearson.
Thank you very much, Linda. That was very nice, and also thank you for coordinating our visit. It's gone really nicely so far. And also just thank you to Whidbey Audubon. I feel like my relationship with Whidbey goes back a long way. Early conversations with Francis and others discussing how you're going to be doing the pitch and gillimot monitoring and what were the best ways to go about doing that. And Peter Hodem and I remember, was it your house in your living room, I think? Yeah, with Eleanor? Yeah, so going back a ways. It's always nice to be here. I think I've given one presentation to Whidbey Audubon, but it was a very long time ago. And it may have been a paper or discussion that Peter and I co-led, if I remember correctly. But it's nice to be back here. It's always nice to be on Whidbey. I go around Whidbey a lot, but it seems like I don't come on to Whidbey a lot. So I'm usually on a boat in one spot or another around the island. And so it's very familiar to me from the water, but I don't spend enough time on the land to see the island. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. And I'm going to talk about my favorite species. And for me, my favorite bird species is the one I'm talking about or seeing at the moment. So, and apparently today I'm talking about tufted puffin, so that's going to be my favorite species. But throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of different species. I've worked on land birds for a long time. I did some work with Sievert rower at the Burke Museum and studied hybridization between hermit and Townsend's warblers. But then eventually sort of moved into very applied aspects. And eventually I started working on seabirds. And that's when I feel like I saw the light at that time. It was like, oh yeah, no, these are great birds. But I've done work on snowy plovers, on streak-horned larks, on Tufted Puffins, I supervise our work on marble murrelets and our surveys of marble murrelets. Another species we spend a lot of time thinking about and figuring out how to help it do better. And it's a species that's not doing well, unfortunately, in Washington. So let's move on to the... Yes, I'll do that. Let's move on to the Tufted Puffin and talk about the dynamic seascape it lives in. And what I'd like to do today is introduce you to both the Salish Sea, and I don't feel like I should really introduce you to that since you sit in the middle of it. But then I'll move out to the outer coast, and I'll do that all through pictures. And they're mostly my pictures unless they're indicated on the slide. And then I'll talk a little bit about what is a puffin, because people get confused about that. I won't spend a lot of time on that. Then we'll talk about their natural history, and then move into their conservation status, some of the research we've been doing, and then finally talk about some of the conservation actions we and others are taking to try to help it. So let's start with the Salish Sea, and the Salish Sea you are all very familiar with, being here at the northern end of the Puget Sound. But the Salish Sea, as you are keenly aware, the Salish speaking peoples are still here, and they're still actively engaged in managing the resources of the state. And the Salish Sea is an interesting place. It's a very busy place where we see a lot of shipping and a lot of boats coming into the Salish Sea, either going to the Port of Tacoma, the Port of Seattle, or the Port of Vancouver. It's a place where we love to play and sail or kayak or whatever. We love to walk its beaches and visit its parks. Some of us are lucky and we can see it from our houses. I wish I was one of those people. And it has two places that are really important to seabirds in all of the Salish Sea. They're really the two most important places. That includes the Canadian side as well. And there are these two islands, Protection Island and Smith. And the majority of our seabirds in the Salish Sea nest on these two islands. At one point, it was estimated that actually 80% of the seabirds in the Salish Sea nested on these two islands. I don't think it's quite that extreme anymore. And Smith Island is right off of Whidbey. It's only, about 4 miles offshore. It's an island I visit every summer. Sometimes I visit this time of year as well, not on a day like yesterday. I pick my days carefully because I like to stay alive. But it's a neat place in some ways. It's an odd-looking place. It's got these erosional bluffs, and it's a very important place for a variety of seabirds, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And another place, which is way bigger, it's about 2 miles in length, and that's Protection Island. And Protection Island has one of the largest rhinoceros auklet colonies in North America. It's actually the largest in the lower 40, it's the biggest in this area, and it's one of the biggest in the world. It has over 35,000 nesting pairs of rhinoceros auklets on it. So it's, that's 70,000 birds of just rhinos. So it's pretty special place. And both of these islands have been managed as a National Wildlife Refuge. And so they've been managed by Washington Maritime National Wildlife Refuge Complex. And that's all done out of Squim area, out of the base of Dungeness Spit. And they both are still National Wildlife Refuges today. I'm going to talk a little about the nuance now. Protection Island is now managed by the Jamestown Sklallam tribe. So it's managed by the tribe, but it still is a refuge. So the status of the island in terms of its being a refuge has not changed. And so now, instead of working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, when I go out to this island, I'm now working with Jamestown. And that, so far, that collaboration is working really well. So that's been a real positive change for me. It was positive the other way, and it's been positive now. And when we think about these islands, they're important to a variety of species. They're important to species that just move through the area or maybe to use it seasonally. I took this picture on Smith Island, and this is a black turnstone. And so this species, you'll see it, sometimes this time of year, but you certainly see it during migration as they're moving through. Throughout much of the year, you see species like our sea ducks, and some of the sea ducks will go ashore. Harlequin duck certainly does. I took this picture a week and a half ago off of off of Fort Flagler, but you could pretend we're on one of those two islands because I see them there regularly. I was in my kayak. And the harlequin ducks on the island all the time. And the only time when they're not there is when they go up our big rivers where they ultimately nest. And they're very important nesting sites for the black oyster catcher. I didn't realize till actually after I had taken this picture and I zoomed in and you could see all these fleas on this bird. And I didn't realize that. You can't see it probably very well. The resolution isn't great in this picture. But if you look really closely, they're flying around right here. And sometimes, particularly for those of us that hold birds, often you realize they have a lot of ectoparasites. And when I think about black oyster catcher, really, I think tells me why it's important to keep people off of these islands. A lot of times people are upset because they can't go to these islands, they can't visit them, they can't walk the shores. These are really the only two places that are, well, there aren't very many places that are completely off limits like these. And it's really important that they are. And in the picture really gives you that answer. And that answer is the two eggs are sitting right there, but they're hard to see. And they're on the beach. And so they're right here. And it's very easy to step on them and crush them. Also, if we go onto the beach, if we brought our dog, if we bring and decide to have a picnic out there, we would keep the adults away from those eggs so they wouldn't be able to incubate properly, and those eggs would probably fail. And then those eggs eventually will hatch. And so this is a picture of some eggs on Destruction Island. And then the chicks are precocial. So within hours of hatching, they're running around on the beach. Very vulnerable, being taken care of very well by pretty aggressive adult parents. They're the most aggressive birds I've ever seen. I've seen a peregrine falcon come in, and they'll both go at it. No problem. They just go at it. I was just like, whoa. It's mind-boggling. So these two individuals were very close to me. I was a bit nervous about it. I was watching it very carefully. I was like, oh, do we need to get out of here? But fortunately, the male came over and he started brooding them. And you notice when I watch shorebirds, and I've worked with snowy plovers quite a bit as well, and the males will be with the chicks a lot after the chicks hatch. And you can see what he's doing is he comes up to them and he's actually parting the feathers. See how the feathers are being parted? So he's actually able to sort of stretch those feathers and open it up. The chicks are then coming up underneath and into the feathers because they're down covered. They don't have their feathers yet, so he's helping to thermoregulate them. The females can do that as well, but the males do more. And with snowy plovers, the males almost do all of it.
And how do you know that's the male?
It's a good question. How do I know? One is about behavior. Another thing, and I don't know, there's been one paper on the flecks in the eye. And for those of us who do high-resolution images, unfortunately, this image is not high resolution on this. On here, it's beautiful. On there, it's not as nice. But when I zoom in on that picture, I can actually look for the flecks in the eye. And the females tend to have the flecks and the males don't. It's based on one published paper. This individual actually didn't have the flecks, the other one did, and also he was doing most of the brooding. So I'm guessing, I don't know. And then, of course, one of your favorite birds, you've been watching for a long time, the pigeon guillemot nest on both of these islands. And they have a very near-shore diet. Whoa, what happened? Okay. I'd rather not see myself. That's better. But when they come, they go offshore. We don't know where they are in the winter. I mean, we see them in the winter, right? They're here. But some work done in the Farallones recently, which I found just absolutely fascinating, where they put tags on their pigeon guillemots there. I don't know if you have learned about this study, but they then tracked where they went in the non-breeding season. So this is the Farallon Islands, down by San Francisco. They came all the way up here. They came into the Salish Sea. Then they went all the way up to Haida Gwaii. They spent the winter up in Haida Gwaii. They presumably molted up there, and then they returned. We would never have known that if we hadn't put tags on them. So folks doing that research, through Point Blue, help us to learn where they're going. It'd be really interesting to do something similar with these birds. But when they're here, they tend to be in the near shore, and they're eating that very near shore diet. And you see things like the snake prickleback. I love that fish. I just think it's a beautiful fish. And then, of course, you see a variety of other birds that you're used to seeing on your ferry landings, where your pelagic cormorants. Your double-crested cormorants nest in a variety of spots in the Salish Sea. This is Cobos Rocks. They also nest down by Olympia and a variety of other places on pilings near Bellingham, right off of your island here on pilings. This was a former colony that was up on Protection Island. It's not there anymore. Then, of course, we have our Olympic gull, and we call it that because the glaucous-winged gull often hybridizes with the western gull. Unless you take their DNA, we don't really know what they are, so I think calling them Olympic gulls is a good idea. But they nest in many hundreds, thousands up on Protection Island, and they're very good and very capable of getting a marine diet. They can also eat human-derived food as well. But you can see that when the smelt are spawning, you'll see them come in like this, and they're very good at catching fish. And they lay 2 to 3 eggs, and they take care of that chick. And you can see that chick, they go through this cute phase for a short while, and then they go into that awkward teenage stage pretty quickly. But you can see this bird still has this egg tooth on it, that little piece on the very tip of the beak, and that's what it used to get out of that egg. I have to admit that when I took this picture, I paid for it. And I was bleeding afterwards. So the adult associated with this one decided that they didn't want me there anymore, and they hit me really hard on the back of the head. But we were doing a full survey that day, so I was working with the tribe, and we had gone through the whole colony, and we had counted them all. And at the end, I said, we need a couple shots. And I decided to take a picture, and the gull was not happy about that. And then off of the environment just off of your shore here, you see a lot of kelp, and these kelp beds are incredibly important. And some of the banks just off of Whidbey are incredibly important as well. Places like Hines Bank, Partridge Bank. When you go to those places in the summer, they are just full of birds. And those birds are finding all kinds of forage fish there. And it can be a lot of sand lance and a lot of herring. So let's leave the Salish Sea and go around the corner. And as we do that, we go out by CQ and see seal and sail rock. And then we round the corner, which I think is just a spectacular place at Cape Flattery. And this is at sunrise, heading out out very far out on this day. I love being by this area. And of course, the environment out there is different. You're used to big waves here. We got some big waves last night here. They may have gotten to 8 feet, maybe 12 feet. Pretty big, right? Out there, you can have combined seas of over 30. So it can be a big ocean hitting these colonies and shaping these colonies on the outer coast. Pretty spectacular place. And fortunately, from Point Grenville all the way up to Cape Flattery, we have all these offshore rocks and islands, these haystack rocks. And people think of that in Oregon, they don't think of that in Washington. Well, in Oregon, you can drive the coast. You can go to Cannon Beach. You can see haystack rock. Here, you can't really do that, and you have to be in the water to see these places, or flying like Barry was when he took this picture. You notice this picture is almost identical to the one in the magazine. If you look in there, actually, I don't know if it's in the magazine or in the digital version, but this is my picture, not Chris's. We were standing next to each other, and we both happened to take the same picture. So just a beautiful place. I'm up on Alexander Island looking to the north, looking at Giant's Graveyard and some of the half-rounded. And then Chris took this picture for the Audubon piece where he flew a drone to take a picture of Destruction Island. And Destruction Island is a place where I've worked quite a bit, and not because it's necessarily the best seabird spot. There are other spots that are better, but it's one that you can work on. As you can imagine, a lot of these rocks are very steep and they're very high. And to be able to work on these safely is a challenge. And I know that because I've been taken off of this one in a helicopter. The intertidal is spectacular. when you get out here, just really special. The Pisaster, the sea star, we lost almost all of them. So for a long time, we wouldn't see any after the sea star wasting disease came through. And now they're just as abundant as they were previously. And what's interesting, as they came back, they appeared to be more orange ones. And eventually I started seeing the orange and the purple. And I don't know if anyone studied that, but I always thought that was kind of interesting. Sea otters are very abundant on the outer coast. Occasionally you see one here, and certainly as you go further out the straits, you see more of them. But on a single day, I can see quite a few hundred in a day. And they've recovered remarkably well. Their rate of growth has been phenomenal since the 1970s when we reintroduced them. So we brought them from Alaska, brought them down, and they have recovered really well. Always fun to see them. When you're watching them and you're close to them, they behave a lot like a dog. They seem to scratch themselves just like a dog would. They're not always so cuddly and pretty looking. Occasionally they look kind of menacing like this individual. On the outer coast, we also have pupping Salish sea lions, and particularly on the northern coast. Sometimes they're not happy to see you. And then, of course, we have our migrating birds. Here's a ruddy turnstone taken on destruction. And, of course, we have our birds that move up, that breed further south. So they breed down in Mexico. So like the brown pelican, when it's done breeding in May, they start moving up into our area. The same thing is true with the Heerman's gull. And, of course, we have your favorite, singing in the rain, the pigeon guillemot. And the black oyster catcher is always present and yelling at me. And then on the outer coast, we tend to see more Brandt's cormorants. So they're somewhat nomadic, and they move around quite a bit. They tend to nest right on the rocks like you see here. And this picture I took out of state in California where you can get right next to them. But it does show well sort of that amazing color of that eye and that throat. And then on Tatoosh, when you're sitting up on Tatoosh, it's a pretty special place to be. Tatoosh belongs to the Macaw tribe, so you have to permission from the Macaw. Peter's standing right here, right on Burning Barrel Point, where Julia Parrish did a lot of her work. And from that spot, standing on Burning Barrel Point, we can watch all of the common murres nesting on those cliff faces. And then when you go out in a boat and head out into the ocean, in the near shore, looking out, Canaan's looking out, and you can see the rhinoceros auklet. You had a melanistic one, and so that's cool. You might see the common murres, but eventually as you're getting guided further out by the white-sided dolphins, and you end up seeing the whales, and around the whales you'll see the seabirds, the pink-footed shearwaters. There are two of them in this picture. Actually, probably more than two in that picture. And then eventually you get out to the blue water, and that's always a really fantastic place to be. And that's where the continental shelf drops off, and where that drops off is where you have all this nutrient-rich water that gets brought up, and there's a lot of productivity. If there's a lot of productivity, that means there's a lot of zooplankton, phytoplankton. There are things feeding on that zooplankton, phytoplankton, and so that means the predators come in and find food. Here's a Laysan albatross. Laysan albatross don't breed here, but they spend time on our outer coast. We see quite a few of them. This is a picture I took in Hawaii. They're really a spectacular bird. This bird was sitting on an egg. We have our black-footed albatross we see on the outer coast, and this was on a halibut opener, and this one took advantage of somebody's bycatch. So happy to pick this rockfish. You see a lot of Jaegers. Some days we have with the Grand Slam where we see all three species of Jaegers, and then we also see the South Polar skua. Not uncommon to do that in a day, but it's fun when you do. And then you get out there where the whales are, and you see the Heerman's gulls. The Sabin gulls. Anyway, all those places are important to puffins. So I just wanted to get warmed up and think about all those environments because they're really important places for the puffin. And the puffin uses all of those places. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about what is a puffin. And what I have here is the phylogeny of the auks. And the puffins in that family, so is the guillemot. And you'll see two species at the bottom that are actually gulls. And you often put an outgroup at the bottom, and that helps root the tree. And so it helps ground that tree in place. And then we look at this pattern of ancestry and descent, which you see here. And you can see up top, we have the murres, the dovekie, the murres, the guillemots, the murrelets. Eventually you get down to the auklets, and then finally you're down at the puffins at the bottom. So the puffins are down here, and you notice that we actually have 3 of the 4 puffins in Washington. And I have pretty good evidence that actually now we have 3 that breed in Washington. So rhinoceros auklets, the most abundant. We have lots of them, tens of thousands to maybe hundreds of thousands of them. Tufted puffin, not so many. Numbers are quite low now, maybe just a little over 1,000 birds in Washington remaining. And then the Atlantic puffin, so if you're looking at this pattern here, the rhino is the most basal member of this group. And then coming off of the rhino was a tufted puffin. And then coming off of that tufted puffin, you'll see 2 sister taxa. And that's the Atlantic puffin you see here, and this is one you see on cereal boxes and everyone talks about. And even when you're down at Cannon Beach, it drives me nuts. So you're down at Cannon Beach, you're going in the shops, right? And they have Haystack Rock right there. And they have all these tufted puffins right there. And then they're selling all this Atlantic puffin stuff. We have a perfectly good puffin. Anyway, I like the Atlantic puffin. And then we have the horn puffin. And I'm going to talk about the horn just for a minute. And the reason I am, because it's been a common visitor, as you're well aware, because people who go out to Smith go out there to take pictures of it, and there's been one out there for quite a while now. We first saw it in 2017, and we've been watching it every single year since. And it comes out there, and there's just one. And it would come onto the colony, it would fly around, it would hang out with the tufted puffins, it would go up to the burrow with the tufted puffin, they would clap bills together, they're acting like a mated pair, and then it would go into multiple burrows. But usually when a bird is going into multiple burrows means you're not breeding. If you're breeding, you focus on just that one. You take care of your egg, and then you take care of your chick. And then something happened. In 2024, this picture on the left was taken by the Spirit of Orca. So those are folks taking tours out of Anacortes out there. And they photographed this picture. This is the first time during the breeding season where we were seeing 2 horned puffins together. And then this last year, something really unique happened. We saw a horned puffin carrying a billload of fish. We're standing there at the colony. We said it's coming in. And Ryan says to me, it's got fish. And I said, no. And he goes, yes. And it did. And a bunch of people now have taken pictures of it. And if you're bringing fish back to a burrow, you've got a chick. So it's breeding. So that's pretty exciting. So we have evidence of several new species breeding in Washington. Ancient murrelets, we've now documented 100%. So we have them breeding in Washington. It's a new species. And we now have pretty good evidence for Manx shearwaters on the outer coast, where they're coming into colonies in the middle of the night. So we have acoustic recording devices out there on a number of these islands, and they're coming in throughout the whole season. That's a species you only find in the Atlantic. And we started seeing it, I would say, pretty regularly in the 1990s, but then they didn't become abundant until really in the past decade. And now when I'm on the outer coast, I see them regularly. It'd be really hard for me to go to La Push to Destruction Island and not see a Manx shearwater. That's how common they've become. And I've even seen them when I go from Protection Island to Smith. So if I motorboat through that route, I've seen them on that route. And you'll see a Manx shearwater. Sorry, I don't have a picture of one, sorry. So anyway, we have evidence of several new breeding species in Washington. So that's exciting. Let's talk a little bit about natural history of tufted puffins. They breed from the Farallon Islands, so all the way from the San Francisco Bay, all the way up through Oregon, Washington, up through the Gulf of Alaska, and really we're looking at sort of that salmon brownish color, at least that's the way it looks to me, all the way out through the Aleutians. They're up in the Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea. They come over into Russia and then over into the Sea of Japan. So they cover all of that area in terms of their breeding range. The heart of the population's in the Aleutians, and that's where we have the biggest populations in the world. And the vast majority of tufted puffins breed in Alaska. And what's interesting is we don't know exactly where they are in the winter. We have very little information. They're out in the Pacific. We think they're far offshore. They don't come into the near shore in the winter. They're just out there. And what's interesting is when you run into them, they look like this. This bird I took a picture of in the fall. I think this was in October. I'm probably 15 miles offshore when I took this picture. And this is what they look like. And you notice they've lost that sheath on their beak. They'll grow that up again next year. This is not a juvenile. This is an adult. So, it's lost that. It's lost its tufts. And it's lost most of that white face patch. But it'll grow all of that back again by the next breeding season. So where do they breed in Washington? Well, they used to breed. So we have a document called the Catalog of Washington Seabird Colonies. You can find it online. There's a PDF of it out there. It was done in the 1980s to I guess it was published around 1989. It was by Speech and Wall. And it was a very nice document. It really provided information on where do all of our seabirds breed in Washington. And there's a similar catalog for Oregon and a similar one for Alaska. And what we ended up doing is going out and figuring out where are they today, and they're where those blue dots are. And so you can see they breed in two places in the Salish Sea, right off of Whidbey and Smith, and then down on Protection Island. And actually, we may be down to the last pair on Protection Island. Fortunately, we still have about 20-some pairs that are using Smith. And then the next closest spot is over at Tatoosh, and they go all the way down to Point Grenville. And on the outer coast, this gives you an idea of the habitat they use. So what we can do is create these hot and cold maps of use, or these predicted density surfaces. So red means there are a lot of birds or a lot of use, and blue, cold colors means there's very little. And you can see they use that area right along the coast where their colonies are. So you can pick out the colonies just by looking right where it's hot. And then you can see that they forage pretty far offshore, and they're going almost to the shelf break sometimes to forage. So they're not always foraging in the near shore. They can be going pretty far offshore. Whereas if we do the same pattern for rhinoceros auklets, we'll see that they actually forage much more in the near shore, and they're nesting in the near shore. So tufted puffins are making these longer journeys. And you can even see the colonies that have very few individuals. I'm going to step away for a second. But right here is Aaron and Aaron's bride. Ooh, I caused it to go away. At Point Grenville. And you can see the yellow there. And there are actually a few pairs there. So it actually captures this. And this is at sea information. So we're just using information on where were they detected from boats in creating this map. So it does a pretty good job. One of the most important places for tufted puffins in Washington is Carroll Island. And this is Carroll. This also happens to be where we have ancient murrelets. Where we're hearing Manx shearwaters. It's where we have a lot of things. We have leeches and fork-tailed storm petrels on this island. We have Cassin's auklets nesting on this island. It's pretty amazing. And it's hard to get an idea of size here. I wish we had a human being in this picture. But there are actually a bunch of stellar sea lions in this picture. If you look at the lower right part, that little finger sticking out on the lower right part of the island, there are little brown spots that look like grains of almost like rice. Each one of those is a stellar sea lion. Stellar sea lion, when I'm standing next to a big male, he's like this when he's on his flippers. He can be 12 feet from here to here. He can be 1,800 pounds. These are big animals. So it just gives you an idea that this island's bigger than you think. It's not huge. Here's Alexander, which is another very important. And Chad's in this picture, which gives you a little idea of size. But again, another really important, all those same species nest here as well. And tufted puffins breed in burrows, like your pigeon guillemot. They're very adept at digging their burrows. And in Washington, all of their nests are in burrows. But if you go down to the Farallon Islands, all of their nests are in crevices and rocks. So they will use crevices and rocks. And they lay us just one egg, whereas your guillemot will lay 2 eggs. But they only ever lay 1 egg at a time. And they incubate that egg for about a month. So usually when you're near a colony, you'll see individuals offshore of that colony. here I am. This is a picture I took in the, by ICTAC in the Aleutians. So you can see the puffins will be right adjacent to the colony. And then they're out there in all kinds of conditions. Sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's not. And then if you're on a really big colony, you'll just see just many, many puffins. And in this picture, there are hundreds and hundreds of puffins flying in the sky, and they look like insects. There are that many of them. This island has, hundreds of thousands of puffins on it. It's a pretty special place. And then coming back to Washington, this is one of our birds. They are very adept at digging and making their burrow. And this is a bird I caught in the act on Jagged Island. And this bird was going in and grabbing pretty good sized rocks and bringing them out. But often what they do is they seem to go in there and they dig away with that beak, which is a very powerful beak. If you get bitten, you know it. I have somebody who volunteered to work with me on some puffins. We were capturing them in the middle of the night. We were out by Tatoosh, and she got bitten on the finger, and she still doesn't have full feeling back in that finger. That's how hard it bit her. So they have a powerful beak that can cut away at that burrow. And the other thing they do is have really sharp claws. And they just kick out that dirt. And they're kind of like a dog, where that dirt just comes flying out. And when you're watching it, all of this sort of dirt just comes flying out of the hole. It's pretty amazing to watch. And this pair right here, when I took this was years ago. And this pair was probably just trying to figure out how to breed. This is the middle of the summer. I know they're not breeding. They're both working on their burrow in the middle of the summer. So they don't have an egg, and it's too late for them to be having an egg. And then eventually this pair came back the next year, and they ended up having a chick. And then every year since they have been having chicks. But they get pretty dirty. So you can see the one popping out now, and you see the tufts get pretty dirty when they're in there digging away. And then they do line their nests, and I find lining you find that not really in guillemots, but you certainly find it in rhinoceros auklet nests. Some of them put a lot of lining in there, some of them put very little or almost none. It's really variable. This is the only bird I've ever seen bring back seagrass. I've never seen this ever before until I saw this. This is off of Smith, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of seagrass. And then when they are forming a pair, they eventually mate. And it was interesting to watch the ritual of mating with puffins. A lot of it happens together, and you'll see this coming together of the two, but also a lot of it is happening underwater, and I would like to see what's happening underwater, because they'll go underwater together, and you'll see that they're going underwater together, and they'll come back up again, and then they'll go back underwater together, and they'll come back up again. And I don't know what's happening under there, but it'd be fascinating to know. I know I'm sounding like a voyeur. But the males tend to put their head back like that and open their beak. And how do I know it's the male? Well, you can tell in a minute, because he was the one on top. So the other thing, when you look at these, like these two individuals, you can look at the grooves, and the grooves are different among individuals. And it can give you an idea sometimes that they think it might be related to age. So the more grooves you have in your beak may have to do with age. We wanted to do this at some of the zoos to actually take pictures of known age individuals and look at the number of grooves in their beak to see if it actually does that hold up or not. So these two eventually mated and ended out having an egg. You see a lot of activity on the colony, a lot of going back and forth. A lot of individuals will be maintaining themselves, so you see a lot of preening. You see a lot of wing flapping, and you see a lot of social interactions. And they come together, like you see here, and you'll see again in the Audubon, Chris and I are standing next to each other. This is my picture, not Chris's. You see these sort of interactions a lot where they come together as a group, particularly when they're done feeding their chicks. And one of the classic behaviors you see, they come together and you'll see these bill claps, very characteristics of puffins. And you see that in rhinoceros auklets as well. except rhinoceros auklets are coming back to the colony at night, and tufted puffins are coming back during the day. This is really typical, a lot of putting your head to the side or swinging your head to side, opening up your beak. More of that bill clapping. And then they do what we call the silly clown walk. And that's where the two individuals will walk side by side, and it's sort of an exaggerated walk along the slope. And we just like to call it the silly clown walk because it kind of looks that way. But eventually they'll have that egg will hatch and a chick will come out. I don't have any pictures of pufflings. We have looked at them with our cameras, our fiber optic burrow cameras. I'll show you one in a minute. But I just stole this off the internet. And then once that chick hatches, both adults are feeding like mad. And initially they tend to be bringing back smaller fish, and eventually they'll start bringing back bigger and fewer fish. And this individual's got a giant buildup, probably 20-some sand lance in that beak. And this is right off the quill needles off of La Push. Here we see some smelt being brought back. And then a lot of herring. Very common to see a lot of herring. Sometimes it's really big herring like this, and it may be just one or two. And then more often you see these cookie cutter size herring. And sometimes you see larval fish like the one off the tip of that beak, which is a little hard to see in this picture. And eventually when as they come into the colony, they circle and they circle and they circle and they circle, and eventually they land. And they're probably circling to avoid predation. So they're worried about who might try to steal their food, or is there an eagle here, or is there a peregrine falcon here? And so they're probably thinking very carefully, what's the situation like on the ground, and they're checking that out. But then when they finally do come in, they come in very quickly, and they go right into the burrow. They don't hang out on the surface with that beak load of fish. They just go right in. And you can see it's sort of capturing air and stalling and coming right in, and it's got its feet out. You notice it does have a ripped webbing. We see that periodically in seabirds. I don't know how they rip their webbing, but you'll see that. It's not uncommon. They seem to do okay with it. A little bit about the conservation status now. How are they doing? Well, let's talk about the population trends. And as I mentioned, when I was first asked by somebody at the agency, said, should we list the puffin? And I said, well, let's go and visit and see how they're doing and go visit all their colonies. And so what I did is we spent 2 years visiting all the colonies in Washington and saying, are they occupied anymore or not? And we ended up with this map. And you can see that we lost them from all the historically occupied sites in the San Juan Archipelago. That's not surprising. Too many human beings up there. The two remaining spots in the Salish Sea are really Smith and Protection. And then it's from Tatoosh going south to Point Grenville is really where the majority of our puffins are in Washington. And we've lost about half of our historically occupied colonies, so we're about half of the number we had in the past. We ended up listing it as endangered. We worked real closely with Tor Hansen. Some of you might know Tor. It was our first sort of public-private work like this we did. So we worked with the Sea Doc Society and Joe Gatos, and Joe contracted with Tor. Tor is a really good author. He's written books on chimpanzees and a variety of other things. He wrote a book, I think it's called Feathers or Feather. You may have seen that book. And another one called Seeds. Anyway, do they use the same nest every year? So I just happened to see that question. Yeah, we think they do. We think that pretty much all of the burrow nesters are using the exact same nest year after year. And we think that's where the pair bond is. That's where they come back and meet each other as a pair. Because when they're out at sea, they're separate. And when they come back together to that burrow is where they find each other again. And the reason we know that, sometimes we put transmitters on them or tags on them, and then we capture them the next year in that exact same burrow we caught them in the year before. Sorry, I saw the question, so I answered it. So the public-private relationship there, Tor ended up writing this and did a fantastic job. And so ended up really working out well. The other thing we did is I was contracted by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to look at how are they doing range-wide. So I brought together a bunch of data sets over a long period of time And I had data from the Farallon Islands all the way up to the Aleutians. And I looked at 3 large, what we call marine ecosystems. The California Current System, which runs from Mexico to just north of here. The Gulf of Alaska starts just north of here and goes all the way up through the Gulf of Alaska. And then we have with this, I'm calling it the Aleutian/Bering Sea system, because on one side of the Aleutians is the Bering, on one side is the Aleutian. But if you're sitting on one of those islands, you could fly this way or this way, and you could be in one system or the other, so I just combined the two for this analysis. And we found out that they're actually doing not very well. And so this is just Washington data, and you can see where they were in the early 1900s and where they are today, where we had tens of thousands of individuals, and today we have just a little over 1,000 individuals. So a pretty dramatic loss. The insert just shows where are they, and you can see that most of them are on certain colonies, and those 3 colonies that really stand out that have dots further to the right are Alexander, Jagged, and Carroll. And those still are the most important colonies to the puffin today. And then in terms of how they're doing throughout the other currents, Gulf of Alaska, very strong evidence for decline there. So we're seeing strong declines in the California Current, really strong evidence now for the Gulf of Alaska, particularly with some recent papers that just came out. And then the Aleutians is the one spot where we seem to have stable numbers. And then we ended out writing a recovery plan. Tor was involved again, and a team of us worked on that, and that was to guide our recovery actions in Washington. And we looked at the factors affecting tufted puffins. This is a list of some of them. And it was the first time we really called out climate change and what are the effects of climate change and how are they affecting the food resources for tufted puffins. And really that whole top group is being affected a lot by warming oceans. And as the ocean warms, we're ending out with less fish in the sea. And that's kind of an overly simplistic thing to say. I could go into all the details, but it would be complex and I'd be here for a few hours. And then the other factors are a variety of things. Human disturbance is a biggie. Tufted puffins are really vulnerable to people. One thing you find about, I can work with rhinoceros auklets and they're just like amazing. I can grab them, I can put tags on them, they don't abandon. Tufted puffin, on the other hand, if I look at it sideways, it might abandon. How I work with a tufted puffin is really different for how I work with a rhinoceros auklet, even though they're both puffins. And that's true for any bird you work with. You'll find that each one is different. If I have a marbled murrelet in my hand, it's the most docile bird in the world. It just sits there and looks at you. And it's pretty amazing. Whereas a tufted puffin will be trying to take my fingertips off. So a variety of other things, including introduced plants and animals I'll talk a little more about. We also have done some work on both plastic pollution and on chemical pollution and some evidence that there's some issues there as well. So let's talk a little about sea surface temperature and warming oceans. And I'm using data from Julia Parrish and the coast work. And some of you are some coast volunteers here? Yeah? Oh, we got one. Great. So it used to be dead birds on the beach and people would count them and they'd walk their beach and they do it every month. And now they actually also look at the amount of marine debris as well and count that as well. And what's really helpful about this data set is you can look at when these mortality events, so when you're seeing sort of normal mortality, like every summer we see these murd deaths on the coast and we expect it because a bunch of birds breed in Oregon, they're coming up along our coast, the dad chick pairs are moving up to the coast. And a lot of those chicks won't survive. And actually, sometimes if we have high mortality, it could be a signal of high reproduction. So sometimes those dead birds is not always a bad thing. Well, it's bad for the bird that died. So you can look at the relationship here. We're looking at a window of time from 2006 up on the top where the bubbles are to 2020. And each bubble represents a mortality event. And if it's a bigger bubble, it means there are more individuals who were in that event. And if it's smaller, there were fewer. And then we're looking at a variety of different oceans. We're starting at the Chukchi Sea, the Bering Sea, down to the Gulf of Alaska, and then Oregon and Washington, California. And we're looking at then sea surface temperature. And when are we getting these warm water events? Warm water events are red. And you can see where we have more warm water events is where we seem to have these mortality events. So when we have these unusual sort of the blob-like events on the coast, they can really have dramatic effects on seabirds. And they often are starving to death during these events. And the other thing, one last thing on that slide, sorry, it's a slide of death, but you see in the groups that are represented above, so Julia's plotted kind of like what were the main individuals associated with those events. And they're variable from fulmars and shearwaters to, there's a scoter one in there. But one thing is you go through there's alcids. Majority of those birds in those pictures are alcids. So they're Cassin's auklets, they're common murres, they're tufted puffins, and they're rhinoceros auklets. And we think they may be unusually susceptible. So what are our recovery priorities for the puffin? There are a lot of them. And we're working on actually most of these. I was actually impressed that we were actually working on most of these. Either we are or our partners are, so that's great. We're doing everything from monitoring populations, trying to reduce threats, trying to get rid of non-native and invasive species that might be affecting them. And we do that through partnerships. And I've had long-term partnerships with a lot of different people. This is kind of the group I'm working with at the moment. But as you can see on this project, there can be different partners. And this is where we're coming up with a range-wide monitoring scheme for tufted puffins. We're focusing on Alaska first, and then we're bringing that scheme down here. But we're doing it in the place where it's hardest to do it first. So we're tackling Alaska first. And plus, they brought the funding. So if you pay, you end up getting what you pay for. Well, I don't know about that. So what's our goal? Our goal is to identify and evaluate possible range-wide monitoring strategies and schemes and figure out how we can do that and have the best performance and reduce the cost. And we'll do that through a variety of different techniques, and we have a postdoc working on that. The next project we're working on is we're looking at range-wide genetic analyses, and this is being led by Teresa Berg at the University of Lethbridge in Canada, where we're all sending samples to her, and then she's doing the analyses. And some of the results we're finding from that, and some of these results are actually good news, because we're seeing not a lot of genetic structuring, and we're seeing that there's movement. So movement's a good thing, because you're moving the genes around, and it means you're not just stuck in one spot, and you're not just inbreeding. So that's a really positive thing. The other reason I was curious about this is, would it be okay if we wanted to reintroduce them in places? Could we bring a bird from Alaska, say, and put it in Washington? And would that be a problem? If there's genetic structuring, we'd have to think about that. If there's not, then it's not such an issue. But individuals do become less related the further apart they are, and that's not surprising. Let's go out on the outer coast just for a little bit, and some of the work we've been doing out there. Here's a picture of Peter Hodum at the University of Puget Sound, one of my long-term partners. This is Eric Wagner, and he's probing a rhinoceros auklet burrow here. So that's a fiber optic burrow probe that we use. We snake that in, and it's got a gaming visor, and we can see what's inside the burrow by putting that in there. And we do that early in the season for rhinos, to determine is it occupied or not. And then we go right after hatching and say, okay, is there a chick in here now? And then we visit it one last time late in the season and say, is there a mostly feathered or fully feathered chick about ready to fledge? And that gives us an idea of reproduction by just doing those 3 targeted visits. For tufted puffins, we don't do that early visit, and we don't do that because we're concerned about abandonment. We find that we actually can probe their burrow once they're provisioning chicks. They're really at that point committed, and they stay. The other way, because we are concerned about puffins and abandonment, is we will, to monitor them, we'll map their burrows. So we have a photograph like this, and we map on where's the burrow. We'll give them a unique number, and we'll track that burrow throughout the season. And then we can look at, how are they doing, and how does it change between years. And some other work we're doing is we're looking at diet. And with rhinoceros auklets, again, I'm going to compare and contrast the 2 species. But for that species, it comes back at night. So we'll be up on Protection Island in the middle of the night, And I'll be up there with my headlamp, and I'm trying not to fall asleep, and then they'll start coming in. And sometimes they hit you. And if they land near you, you can actually scare them. And if you surprise them, they'll drop that billload of fish. And as my daughter used to say, my daughter who's now 30, but when she was younger, she said, "Dad, you're stealing baby food." And I said, "Yeah, you're right, I am." And it is something we think carefully about when we do things like that. So are we actually hurting them? And one thing we found for rhinoceros auklets is that they do very well, even with our activity. And so we have never seen abandonment by our activity, and we've seen that the chicks seem to do just fine. But this is a single bill load. And this bill load, as you can see, is almost entirely sand lance except for 2 salmon. It's kind of unusual. Salmon are not common in the diet, but we do see them. And we see them particularly in pink ears, so when the pink are coming out of the Fraser. The other way we're doing is we're taking pictures. So we're using high-end digital SLRs and taking pictures of them as they're coming into the colony. They're doing that at Haystack Rock as well, down in Oregon. We're talking about bringing the data sets together and doing a comparison there. And so here's Peter, and normally we'd be taking pictures, and we can look at what they're bringing in. This is actually a bird in Alaska, but here's a bird in Washington bringing in a herring. And you can see those larval fish, that's just really hard. Because when we see larval fish like this, we can't identify them as species. So we just have to say larval fish. And then we can look at how does that change over time and space and see is there any evidence that food might be a problem. We can also start to look at the calories that are being brought in, because we can look at the size of the fish relative to the bill size and how many calories that fish has, and see how many calories are being brought in on average to the chick. And then we're trying to figure out, is there a better way of doing this? And we started digging through the literature, and we started looking at all the different literature out there, and one thing we found was this one. And this is a common truth that everybody poops. And it's amazing how much I've worked now with poop in my career. But you can learn a lot about wildlife from poop. Yeah, today I was walking on the island and I was looking at the coyote poop on the ground. I was going, God, I could be figuring out what's that coyote's been eating. Could be eating your cat. So it works remarkably well. And we use metabarcoding of the poop, and we can say, okay, did we actually get up tufted puffin, which is what the top panel shows you, and you can see that scientific name on the right is the puffin's name, and the one on the left is for gulls, because we were worried that we see gull chicks going into the entrances of the burrows, that we might actually get a gull poop instead of a puffin poop, but we did a pretty good job of just getting puffin poops. And then we can, on the bottom, we can start to see what they're eating. And sorry, everything on this one is in Latin, but it's mostly smelt, herring. There is, some rockfish. Anyway, it's a fairly diverse diet. Rockfish, they eat the juveniles, and they can be quite abundant on the outer coast of Washington. And then we can start comparing these different techniques, and what do we get when we look at them in terms of the composition of the diet. And I'm not going to go into too much, but you notice the top 3? Those top 3 are the top 3 in every bird I've looked at so far. I've just done a whole bunch of analyses for the marbled murrelet. We did a bunch of nighttime captures in the past 2 winters of marbled murrelets at night, just not far from here in Port Townsend Bay and Oak Bay and off of Foulweather Bluff. We came all the way over to Smith in the middle of the night in small inflatables and captured them. And for marbled murrelets, they're eating the exact same thing, those 3 species. It's really all, and it's particularly about herring and sand lance. I wish there was more smelt out there. There's not as much smelt, but if there were more, I think that would be better because they are really full of calories. And boy, if we had eulachon, like they have in the Lower Columbia, like we used to have, there's a reason it's called a candlefish. It's because it's just full of oils. So that's some of the work we've been doing. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the conservation actions and some of the issues. I talked about non-native and invasive species. This is one of them. The European rabbit is one of the most widely introduced mammals to islands throughout the world. They've been introduced to over 800 islands throughout the world. And throughout much of the world, they've been super effective at getting rid of them. And one group in particular is quite good at it, called island conservation. And they can actually get rid of them from an island in a couple years. And they were introduced to Destruction Island, and they're still there. And they're introduced by lighthouse keepers. And usually they're introduced because they want meat, and they want fresh meat. And lighthouse keepers weren't paid well. And if you grow some rabbits, well, then you've got some food. And the rabbit population exploded. And you can see an area on the right here. I'm standing in one spot, and I take the picture on the right, and you can see that heavy erosion. And we've lost a whole bunch of puffin burrows due to erosion because of the rabbits. And they essentially mow it down like a putting green. And we're seeing the perennial grasses being replaced by annual grasses. So just the presence of them grazing is an issue. Some seabirds won't come to an island if you have a mammal like that on it, because they think it might be a predator. And then the European rabbit is actually a hare. And they actually make warrens in the ground. All of our native rabbits on the west side of the state of Washington do not do that. Pygmy rabbits do that on the east and over in Idaho, but not here. So they will go into the burrows and they'll modify burrows that are occupied by seabirds. And in the research done throughout the world, we found there's actually a pretty big benefit. So they've done work down in Australia and New Zealand on the bottom picture where they put exclosures, and we put an exclosure and you keep the rabbits out. Wow, it has a dramatic effect on the vegetation. So the rabbits are having all that effect outside the fence. And then the two species we've seen really positive effects as a result of removal of rabbits, pink-footed shearwater in Chile and some of the work that Peter's done, and then in Iceland, some of the work done on Atlantic puffins. So really positive effects right after the rabbits are removed. And I also want to point out is that we've already done it. So I happened to find this article. I don't know how I stumbled upon it. It was from 1925. It was put out by the United Press, and it came out of Olympia. I happened to find it in the Miami Daily News. I don't know why they picked it up, but they're talking about the lighthouse on Smith Island and how it's being undermined by all of these rabbits and causing it to fall into the ocean. And so the Department of Biological, what was it called at the time? I can't remember. They have a different name. Well, the Biological Survey is what it was called at the time, which I think became USGS, I think. Eventually. But what they did at the time is they actually used strychnine gas. You'll see that here. So they actually poisoned the rabbits in Smith. And you can see here in this article, I think they killed, was it 600 and something rabbits in the first year, and 697 and 205 in the second year. And I can tell you today there are no more rabbits on the island. So they got rid of them. So it has been done in the past. And we just got money to do it here in Washington, so we're actually going to get rid of them on destruction. And we'll do that with island conservation. The other thing we've been doing is looking at social attraction. So can we bring them to places where they're not? And they've done this a lot with a variety of seabirds throughout the world. And it was actually first done by Steve Kress on Atlantic puffins in Maine. And he ended up putting out decoys like you see Chad doing here. This is on Protection Island. And you can see a box behind him, a cedar box. That's actually for creating a nesting chamber for the puffins. So we ended up putting both out and looking at how they're interacting with these decoys. We ended up with an issue in that the decoys are being hit all the time by bald eagles. They can be hit multiple times in a day. And you can see this eagle actually flew off with one of our decoys. So I can see where it went. And I should point out that on Protection Island, I have seen over 40 bald eagles in a single day on Protection Island. That's how many eagles can be on that island. That's a lot of eagles. That island is only 2 miles long. So what can you do? Well, I think it's really important to do what you do. Form Audubon societies, be part of them, be part of the Salish Sea Guillemot Network, which started out of this Audubon Society. Thank you. Join the Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey team, Julia Parrish's team at UW, and walk your beaches. You can join the Puget Sound Seabird Survey if you're not already doing that. It's another thing you can do, and it's now being run, it used to be run out of the Seattle Audubon. It's now being run out of the Puget Sound Bird Observatory. If you want to read a couple books, these books are just coming out. One just came out, so Eric Wagner, who works with us all the time, The Seabirds as Sentinels, his book just came out of University of Washington Press. It focuses on Destruction Island and seabirds. It talks about the California current, and it kind of uses the seabirds as a way to talk about whole systems. And then there's Maria's book is coming out in April, and you were well aware of that. I think she's coming here to talk about her book, yay. And that's The Bird with Flaming Red Feet. And then there have been a couple articles. You've already pointed out one, the most recent Audubon, talked about some of our work and other work people are doing. So you can, the National Audubon, and that's available on the web. Anybody can, you don't have to be an Audubon member to see that. And then there's also been several articles in the Seattle Times in particular. Amanda Zhao's been doing a great job with a lot of her reporting. Really impressed with her. I was worried about when Linda Mapes retired. But then now we have Amanda, so that's great. I've been going on way too long, so I apologize, and I'll stop yapping, and I'll try to answer any questions. Yeah.
Northwest Passage because of climate change.
Right.
Is that one of the reasons why Atlantic birds can now be found in numbers on the Pacific side?
Well, the only species, I don't know if I should say that, but the only species I see in Washington of Atlantic species that seems to be moving in is a Manx shearwater. I think they're coming probably around a different way, just probably coming around the other way, so a more southerly route. Don't know that for sure, but that would be more my guess. Yeah.
So we've been seeing some Cassin's auklets in the springtime, which we never used to see.
Yep.
Are they breeding in the Salish Sea?
They are not. The closest spot they breed to the Salish Sea that we're aware of is Tatoosh. Yeah. But I've seen them when we've been out catching marbled murrelets in the middle of winter. At night, I spotlighted a bird, and I was like, what is that? And we went right up to it. I was getting ready to capture it, and it was a Cassin's in Port Townsend Bay. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So it depends on the project. Our
Repeat
marble
the
murrelet
question,
at sea
please.
surveys we do year-round now. That's funded by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the summertime. It's funded by the U.S. Navy in the non-breeding season, so starting in the fall through the spring. The U.S. Navy funding has not stopped, and it's been pretty consistent and no issues. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been a real challenge. And so that, yeah, it depends on sort of the funding source. Yeah, Navy, no problem. U.S. Fish has been an issue. And it's not because of the people I work with. It has more to do with farther up the chain and how the money is being passed down or not passed down.